I built the fence for one simple reason: privacy. After months of late-night headlights cutting across my living room and strangers cutting through my yard, I finally saved enough to install a clean, modern cedar fence, perfectly within city code, HOA bylaws printed and highlighted on my desk. The morning after installation, I stepped outside with coffee, proud, relieved, ready for peace. Instead, I heard heels clicking like a countdown. Karen marched over, phone raised, lips tight, eyes scanning for flaws she could weaponize. She didn't say hello. She said, "That thing is ugly. You need to remove it." No introduction, no discussion, just a demand, delivered like law. I calmly told her it was approved, permitted, and compliant. She laughed, a sharp sound, and waved her phone in my face, recording. "The HOA will hear about this," she snapped, as if summoning thunder. Neighbors peeked through blinds. A dog barked. The street held its breath. I explained again, slower this time, that the fence followed height limits, color guidelines, and setback rules. I even offered to show her the paperwork. That's when the meltdown started. Her voice jumped an octave. She accused me of destroying property values, ruining the aesthetic, and disrespecting the community. Each word came louder, faster, aimed to intimidate. She stepped closer, crossing onto my property, finger inches from my chest. I asked her to step back. She refused. She claimed the fence blocked her view, though her house faced the opposite direction. When I mentioned trespassing, she scoffed and threatened fines, liens, lawyers, and something about knowing people on the board. It felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech for years. I kept my voice steady, but inside my patience cracked. I realized this wasn't about a fence, it was about control. And as she screamed into her phone, promising consequences, I understood something important. Giving in would only invite worse. That was when she said the sentence that changed everything. The one that would drag police, the HOA, and the entire block into chaos. I took a breath, planted my feet, and decided to document everything. Because stories like this only end badly when silence wins, and I refuse to let shouting rewrite facts, rules, or reality today. Across the street, phones appeared, whispers spread, and I sensed the moment tipping, the kind that turns a complaint into a spectacle, setting the stage for consequences no one expects. That tension hung heavy, daring someone to blink first, cameras rolling silently nearby. By the time Karen finished her threat-filled monologue, half the street was watching. She ended the recording with a dramatic tap on her screen, like a judge slamming a gavel, then announced she was calling the HOA president immediately. I told her she was free to do so, and calmly turned back toward my house. That should have ended it. Instead, it lit the fuse. She followed me to the gate, still on my property, shouting about community standards and visual pollution. I stopped, turned around, and clearly asked her to leave. That's when she claimed the fence violated an emergency clause she couldn't explain but insisted was real. Her confidence was loud, not accurate. I warned her again about trespassing. She smirked and said, "Go ahead, call the police. I dare you." So I did. The moment I pulled out my phone, her tone shifted. Not calmer, sharper. She accused me of harassment, of threatening her, of lunging, even though I hadn't moved. Neighbors began filming openly now. One whispered, "This is getting crazy." Another shook his head. Karen noticed the attention and leaned into it, projecting her voice like she was on stage. "This is what happens when people don't respect rules," she yelled, gesturing wildly at the fence. While waiting for the police, I stood quietly, hands visible, saying nothing. Karen paced, pointing at fence posts, claiming each one was illegal. She measured the height with her arms, which didn't match reality. She said the color was wrong, though it matched the approved palette exactly. Every claim contradicted the last, but she said them with absolute certainty. The HOA president finally called her back. We all heard her side of the conversation. She exaggerated everything. Called the fence massive, said it appeared overnight without approval, claimed I was aggressive. When she handed me the phone, demanding I explain myself, I refused and said all communication could go through official channels. That infuriated her. She snapped that I was being uncooperative and suspicious. Sirens approached. Karen's posture changed instantly. She stepped back, smoothed her hair, and put on a wounded expression. When the police arrived, she rushed toward them, speaking fast, pointing at me, the fence, the house, the street. I waited my turn. The officers listened, then asked for permits. I handed them a folder I'd prepared weeks ago, anticipating exactly this scenario. They reviewed everything carefully. Karen watched, arms crossed, jaw tight. The longer the officers read, the more her confidence drained. When one officer nodded and said, "This all checks out," the street went quiet. Karen's face flushed. She opened her mouth to argue, but the officer raised a hand, signaling there was more to discuss. And judging by his tone, it wasn't going to go her way. The officer turned from the paperwork to Karen and asked a simple question. "Ma'am, why are you on his property?" The silence that followed was loud, Karen stuttered. Then said she had the right to be there because the fence affected her. The officer calmly explained that opinions don't override property lines. He pointed to the boundary markers, clearly visible, and reminded her that she'd been asked multiple times to step back. Karen didn't like that. She crossed her arms and accused the officer of siding with me. She claimed the HOA would reverse all of this, and that the police didn't understand community rules. The second officer stepped in and clarified that HOA disputes don't excuse trespassing or harassment. Neighbors murmured. Someone quietly said, "Finally." Then came the body cam moment. The officer asked Karen if she'd been recording. She proudly said yes. He informed her that several neighbors had also recorded, and their footage showed her entering my yard, yelling and refusing to leave. Her confidence cracked. She tried to laugh it off, saying people were too sensitive these days. That didn't land. The officer issued a verbal warning for trespassing and told her to return to her property. Karen's face went pale, then red. She protested loudly, insisting I should be the one warned for, provoking her with an ugly structure. The officer looked at the fence, then back at her and said, "A legal fence is not provocation." That should have been the end. It wasn't. Karen spun toward me and shouted that she would make my life miserable. She promised daily complaints, fines, hearings, and lawyers. The officer immediately stepped between us and told her that further threats would escalate the situation. He advised both parties to disengage. I nodded. Karen scoffed. As the police left, neighbors approached me quietly, offering support. One said Karen had done this before, targeting anyone who changed their yard. Another said she'd already lost 2 HOA disputes. Karen overheard this and exploded again, accusing everyone of conspiring against her. At that point, the officers returned, warned her one final time, and told her to go inside. She stormed off, yelling over her shoulder that this wasn't over. The street slowly returned to normal, but the energy felt different. I knew she wouldn't let it go, and I was right. That evening, an email hit my inbox from the HOA board. Subject line, "Urgent Fence Review." Karen had filed a formal complaint, attached photos, and demanded immediate action. What she didn't know was that the HOA president had already reviewed my permits weeks ago, and this time, the response wouldn't just shut her down. It would expose everything she'd been doing behind the scenes, setting up a fallout she never saw coming, one that would permanently change her standing in the neighborhood and finally put an end to her reign of intimidation, once and for all. The next morning, the HOA board's official response landed in my inbox. It was concise, firm, and completely sided with me. They confirmed that the fence met all guidelines, had the proper permits, and was within every legal and aesthetic requirement. No removal necessary, no fines, no adjustments demanded. I leaned back in my chair, thinking, finally, relief. But I knew Karen wouldn't accept this quietly. Sure enough, by mid-morning, I heard shouting from outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw her pacing along her driveway, phone in hand, calling anyone who would listen. She repeated the same claims: property values destroyed, visual disaster, complete disrespect, and gestured wildly at my fence like a general pointing to the battlefield. Neighbors peered through blinds again, some shaking their heads, others recording. The chaos was back. Determined to keep things calm, I decided not to engage directly. Instead, I focused on documenting everything: timestamps, photos, videos, and even the names of witnesses who had seen her trespass. Karen noticed me on the porch and yelled, "Are you laughing at me?" I didn't respond. She stormed toward me, hands flailing, spitting words faster than I could track. "You think this is over? You'll regret this. Everyone will see what you've done." At that moment, I realized Karen wasn't just angry. She was performing. Every movement, every word was designed for an audience, neighbors, cameras, anyone willing to witness her meltdown. And she thrived on chaos. The more attention she got, the louder she became. It was a spectacle. And yet, I stayed calm, letting her theatrics reveal the absurdity of her claims. By noon, the HOA president called me personally. He confirmed again that my fence was perfectly legal and that Karen's complaint held no merit. He even warned that repeated harassment or trespassing could result in penalties against her, including fines or legal action. That was when I felt a small but satisfying shift. Power was moving from Karen to reality. Karen, however, didn't back down. She escalated further, posting her side on social media. She edited clips, exaggerated facts, and tried to rally support from neighbors who weren't involved. The post went viral locally. Within hours, my inbox filled with messages from people curious about the drama, mostly confused but some sympathetic. I realized this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It had become a story everyone wanted to watch unfold. That night, I reviewed all the footage from the previous days. Her meltdown was incredible, almost cinematic. The way she shouted, waved her phone, and jumped between reality and hyperbole. It was insane. And I knew exactly what to do with this story. If handled right, it wouldn't just prove my fence was fine. It would expose Karen's behavior for what it truly was. Chaos dressed up as authority. The final showdown came the next weekend. Karen returned, this time armed with her phone, a clipboard, and an entourage of curious neighbors. She marched onto my property without permission, ranting about codes and violations, insisting the HOA had overlooked something. I calmly asked her to step back. She ignored me, as always, launching into a full-blown lecture like she was the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. I stayed calm, taking out my own camera this time. Every gesture, every word, every absurd claim was documented. Karen pointed at the fence, claiming it was twisted and detrimental to the neighborhood aesthetic, though it was perfectly straight and professionally finished. She yelled about moral obligation and community rights as if her personal taste were law. Neighbors watched, some laughing quietly, some filming. The street had become her stage. When she realized she had an audience, her volume and theatrics skyrocketed. She stomped, waved her arms, and accused me of harassment when I simply filmed from my porch. At that point, even some of her allies started to exchange glances, unsure if her passion was legitimate or just extreme performance. She shouted that the HOA board would hear about this immediately, but I had already shared all the documentation with them ahead of time. Her threats now bounced off solid walls of facts. Eventually, the HOA president showed up in person, flanked by 2 board members. Karen, still shouting, was finally confronted with authority. They calmly explained that the fence was legal, approved, and non-removable. They told her that further trespassing or harassment would trigger formal action, including fines and potential legal consequences. Karen's confident facade cracked visibly. The shouting slowed to muttering, then to glaring silence. Seeing no other option, Karen finally stormed off, muttering about lawsuits and revenge. The street went quiet again, the neighbors slowly returning to their routines. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and looked at my fence. It stood exactly as intended, strong and straight. The chaos had passed, the story documented, and the truth undeniable. Karen's meltdown had been epic, insane, and exhausting, but in the end, it revealed more about her than it did about me. That night, I uploaded the story to YouTube. The footage showed everything. The threats, the meltdowns, the trespassing, and the moments when reality overpowered theatrics. Comments rolled in, viewers divided between shock, laughter, and support. It became one of the most talked about HOA conflicts in the area. And the best part? My fence remained, untouched and victorious, a symbol of patience, rules, and standing firm against chaos. Karen's reign of intimidation ended, not with shouting but with facts, documentation, and calm persistence. And that, my friends, is why never underestimate the power of standing your ground. If you felt the heat of this story, hit like, because real victories start when we stand together. Subscribe to Karen Story Hub to follow every jaw-dropping moment from my Karen files. And tell me below, how would you handle a Karen trying to control your life?